Welcome back to the 929 English series, Love in the Parsha. And welcome back to Rachel. It's
Thank you.
wonderful to continue these conversations with you. In this week's Parsha, Toldot, we continue the love story, in a sense, the love story, between Yitzchak and Rivka. Last week, Rachel, you set out the foundations of that love story, what love means in the context of a husband and a wife. But in such an interesting, fascinating way, that love story kind of takes a curve and meanders here in Parshat Toldot. How would you describe that relationship between Yitzchak and Rivka in this week's parsha?
So the truth is, we have to start with last week's parsha again, in a sense, to understand what's happening in our parsha, because what we discussed last time is how the fact that Yitzchak and Rebecca are so different, they're so other to each other, was a liberating force, was something that shook Yitzchak and enabled him to move on and take initiative and take charge of his life and become future oriented. But the utter otherness of other people is also a challenge, because it means that communication is fraught. Communication is always a challenge. The closer the relationship, the harder it is to communicate across those deep differences between people. And what we see in Yitzchak and Rebecca's relationship is not complicated communication, it's not fraught communication, it's lack of communication. Already in the scene we discussed last time, the scene where Yitzchak and Rebecca meet each other, Rebecca is extremely active and she talks to the slave and she does all kinds of things, but she never says a word to Yitzchak. We'll touch in a second upon when is the first time we hear her actually talking to her husband. Furthermore, she veils herself when she sees him. And in a sense, that becomes a foreshadowing of everything that comes later. Because in our parsha, we see Rebecca undergoing all these emotional, deep experiences and dilemmas. And her response time and time again is to figure out a way to deal with them without communicating anything to her husband. She is pregnant. She can feel that there's a battle happening within herself. What a very weird and alienating experience. She's asking an existential question. Why am I? It's almost, why was I born? Why am I even alive? But she doesn't come to her husband with it. She goes to God. Then God tells her, or through an emissary, tells her that what she's feeling is a foreshadowing of what will happen to these children that she'll give birth to, and that the younger will have dominion over the older. Does she share it with Yitzchak? No. Years later, when Yitzchak is about to give a blessing to the elder son, Esav, whom he loves, does she go and tell him, actually, the younger should be the leader? I think you're about to make a mistake. No. Instead, she chooses deceit and manipulation, using Yaakov as a pawn, basically forcing him, also encouraging him, pushing him to cheat his father by pretending to be his brother. Time and time again, we see those seeds of silence that we already saw in the beginning, in their first encounter, come into fruition and putting a veil between Yitzchak and Rivka.
What about, there is one place in the parsha where there is a conversation after the whole story where Rivka explains to Yitzchak that Yitzchak needs to send Yaakov away to find a wife. So they do communicate at the end. Does Rivka learn her lesson somehow?
Well, first of all, I want to say that I wouldn't put it in terms of learning her lesson. I don't know that it's like that, but I would say that she doesn't, in your terms, your question, but I would say that she doesn't, because, and this is perhaps the most painful fruit of all of this silence that lies between them. Even at that moment, which is the first time we hear Rivka talking to her husband at all in the whole story of their life, she's lying to him. I mean, yes, she also wants Yaakov to have a wife from her birth family. It's clear that she doesn't like Esav's wives that are taken from the local population. But she's also, at the same time, hiding from Yitzchak that the real motivation for her request to send Yaakov to Haran is that she's afraid that Esav is about to murder him. And the truth is that perhaps this is the most painful thing of all. Silence in and of itself is sometimes painful, sometimes not painful, but the fruits of this silence in the relationships between family members and the family of Rebecca and Yitzchak is that even when they communicate, there's something false in the communication. Think about this scene when Yaakov comes and pretends to be Esav to get the blessings from his father. I mean, we all feel bad for Esav, who's cheated, and for Yitzchak, who's cheated. But how does Yaakov feel standing there receiving the blessing and the affection, knowing it's not meant to him? If love is an encounter between two people who are other to each other and then become I and thou, people in a relationship, what we see here is people not encountering each other and instead experiencing this fake, odd, painful, almost parody on such an encounter. And this is a sour fruit indeed.
Sour fruit it is. So interesting how the relationship, the introduction of the word ahav is used connected to Yitzchak and Rivka, and then we read an entire parsha in which there's a souring of what that love really means. I want to invite everybody back next week because the idea of love between, at least in the case next week of boyfriend and girlfriend, and then husband and wife, will play itself out. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rabbi.